right, hello everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30-minute webinar. This is Matt with Variphy, and I'm joined today by Victor Verba. I'm quite certain most of you have heard his voice or seen him here before, or probably already worked with him. Good morning, Vic.
Hey, buddy, how's it going today?
Going very well, going very well. Okay, everyone,
Excellent.
so before we get started, I would like to mention that we are close to releasing our Variphy Cloud offering and are actually looking for additional candidates to join our Cloud EFT beta. So if that is of any interest to you, please let us know or contact beta@variphy.com or cloud@variphy.com for more information. Okay, so for today, we're going to focus on configuring Variphy with SAML SSO for Okta IDP. Okta is a very popular cloud-based SAML identity provider. This webinar will discuss the setup in both Okta and Variphy to enable SAML authentication. Okay, before we get started, we're going to start off with a quick overview of our company and what we do. We'll jump into a live demo where Vic will guide us through the interpretation of the SAML authentication for Okta. We will pause for Q&A and get some of your questions answered. During the demo, if you have any questions, please make sure to ask them in the Q&A panel in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, not the WebEx chat, the Q&A panel, please. And then after the Q&A, we will reward one lucky attendee with a $50 Amazon gift card. So hang around and see if you have won. Okay, so quick overview of Variphy. Variphy is the preferred analytics and management solutions for Cisco collaboration. We provide industry-leading CDR reporting and call analytics, customizable dashboards and widgets, UCCX reporting, remote phone control, change management. But today we're going to be focused on SAML SSO authentication for Okta within Variphy. If you have any other questions on any of our other features, we can certainly take them offline and get those answered for you. Okay, before we get started, one last thing. We want to announce that Variphy now offers a Ninja Enhanced service that provides managed consulting services to our customers. Variphy's SE team will be engaged on a one-on-one basis to remotely provide additional consulting, training, unassisted reporting, dashboarding configuration, and system monitoring assistance. This is a service that provides a dedicated Variphy SE to do all the heavy lifting of report creation, generation, et cetera, et cetera. So for any additional information on that new offering, please let us know. All right. So Vic, I think we're heading off into the wild. So let's go ahead and I'm going to pass you the ball and get the show on the road, sir.
Sounds good. Let's go ahead and get started.
All right. So now stop my sharing. There we go. All yours, sir.
All right, coming up on my end here. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So one of the things we're going to go ahead and walk through today is how we set up a SAML authentication with Okta, like Matt said. Nice thing about Okta seems to be one of the easier setups that we've had before. Although I would give it's a close second to the Google setup. Google's a pretty easy setup as well. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Vast majority of what we're going to do here is going to be within Okta. So the first thing you need to do is log into your Octa portal. I'm going to log into mine here. So once you're logged in, depending on what screen you pop into, you may be in the dev screen. If you're popping into something that looks like this, you are in the dev screen. You can kind of tell a little bit off within your browser setting. Mine's headed prefixed by dev over here. We don't want to work out of our dev screen. We're going to go ahead and work directly out of our administration screen. So I'm just clicking the admin button on the top left over there. So now we're looking at the Okta dev screen. Off to the left over here under applications, we're just going to scoot that guy down and click applications. So from here, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to be able to see any of the applications that were already added. We could absolutely go and use one that was already created here, but we're not going to do that because that doesn't help you. So the first thing we're going to do is add an application. All right. So it's got several applications that you can pick from. We're going to create a new app off up to the top right over here, and it's going to be a web app. So our platform will be web, and our sign-on method is going to be SAML 2.0. From there, we're going to click Create. That's going to bring us into our general configuration screen. So first thing first is we are creating a app within Okta, so we're going to give this app a name. So we'll call it Okta Webinar today. Whoops, if I could spell, there we go. And the next thing you have is you have the option to upload a logo. If you noticed back in the front over there, my buddy Kyle over there is clearly a Tampa Bay fan. But I'm going to go ahead and add a different logo in here because we are Variphy, and if we didn't have a logo, what kind of company would we be? So we're going to add a new logo in here and upload that. So now when we go ahead and anybody looks at our applications, they're going to be able to see the Variphy logo. you could choose whether you want to display that or just some other background information. And we're going to choose to display it and hit next. So now we are in the configuration screen for creating our SAML settings. So the first thing we're going to need to do is get our single sign-on URL. So our single sign-on URL is where we are pointing to Variphy. So this is going to be your Variphy server. It is going to be secure, so we're going to use HTTPS and then the :8443. So HTTPS : / and obviously you would prefer to use the fully qualified domain here to your Variphy server. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and pop an IP address in here. Again, that is the fully qualified domain name or the IP address of the Variphy server. So I'm going to copy this guy out. This is my Variphy server here. And we're going to pop that guy in there. And now we have our Variphy server, and like I said, we are going to use secure, so we're using the port 8443. Now there is a little bit more that you need to add in here besides just the Variphy server. We do need to add the full URL. So rather than typing that, I'm going to go ahead and show you right on our knowledge base. You're going to be able to pull off the full Variphy URL for the single sign-on. And also everything that we're covering today can also be found on our knowledge base. So just by going over to variphy.com, going under the support pages and then hitting our knowledge base, you'll get option to search. And I'm just going to type in Okta. So everything that we're going to cover here today is step-by-step also documented in our knowledge base. So now what we're looking for here is the full URL. So if I scroll down in the knowledge base, you're going to be able to find that. Again, here are all the screens we're going through, but I scroll down a little bit and you'll see our format here for the single sign-on URL. So we need to be able to have the /insight /SSO /SAML /ACS. That is part of the single sign-on URL that we're going to be using for Variphy. So it is important to have that. Also important to make sure that you're using HTTPS and 8443 in there. All right, so that is our single sign-on URL. You're going to want to leave this guy checked. Use this for recipient URL and destination URL. So you're going to leave that guy selected. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and add here is our service provider entity ID. Now Variphy is the service provider in this case. So whatever we enter in here is also going to have to be entered into Variphy, and it is case sensitive. So this is one of those pieces that we're going to want to make sure we remember or copy out, put in a notepad or something like that. Now, your service provider or your IDP, if you're working with maybe an Okta administrator that's creating this, they may give you an entity ID, and that's fine. You were just going to pop that into Variphy, and we'll show you where that is in a second. Or if you're setting up Variphy first, you may be giving your service provider entity ID to your Okta administrator and say, use this. Either way, doesn't make a difference as long as the entity ID for the service provider in Okta matches what's in Variphy. That's the most important piece. So this could be anything. I'm just going to call it Variphy SPID. So well, it helps if I was typing. Variphy SPID. All right, so we're just going to give it that name. And again, I'm going to copy that out of here because we are going to use that later in Variphy. I'm going to paste that off over here in a notepad just so we have it. All right, next thing is you've got relay state. We're not going to worry about that. You're going to leave that guy blank. Next thing down here is the name ID format. This is the format that you're going to be sending your end user type information. So in my case, our format for our name is email address. So I'm going to change this because we use our email addresses to log into our network using Okta. So I'm going to change this to email address. In many cases, it's also unspecified. I'm going to show you in Variphy how you can kind of see and change what that is. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and use email address. And yes, my email address is my Okta user ID. So I'm not going to make any changes here under my application username. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is flow down to our attribute statements. This is configurable and also depends a little bit on what type of information you have. So in my case, my email is my account. All right, so I'm putting email account, and this is case sensitive. This is what we're using to help authenticate with. And again, you're going to see where this information also gets plugged into Variphy, because this is how Variphy, the service provider, is going to talk over to your entity provider or your entity ID. So under name, I'm putting email account. Again, it is case sensitive. And under my value, you're going to see some options here. And in my case, I'm using user and email. Again, because I'm going to pass my user as my email address, so that's what we're using in my setup, and that's what we have a tendency to see a lot, where when you log into your network, your PC, or anything like that, it's your email address. It could be a user ID. In that case, again, you're going to go ahead and change these values specific to how you are authenticating within your Okta configuration. All right, so far, just to kind of recap, we've set our single sign-on URL. We've gotten this URL from the Variphy.com knowledge base. It is /insight/SSO/SAML/ACS, all prefixed by HTTPS, preferably your fully qualified domain name :8443. We've set up our service provider entity ID. We're going to need this because this will translate into Variphy. And for the most part, that's it. There's not much more we need to do here. So I'm going to scroll down and click Next. All right. This is going to ask us some questions. Am I a software vendor trying to integrate my app into Okta? No. For you guys, the answer is going to be I'm a customer adding my internal app. Pretty straightforward. And also, this is an internal app that we have created. We are creating an app in Okta, so you are creating it. So we're going to make sure we check mark those two guys and click Finish. And there we have it. We have now created our Okta webinar app. Couple different things we still need to do is, now that we have our app, we also want to assign some users that can authenticate through this app. So right under assignment over here, I'm going to go ahead and assign some people. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and give myself access and save. And now you're going to see I'm all done. There we are. So now I have the access to be able to use this app. So what's going to happen is, once we've set up Variphy, we're going to plug Victor@variphy.com into the user configurations, make him an administrator. When I go to log in, he's going to say, yep, this person, Victor over here, has permission to be able to use this particular app. So a couple different things here. One, we've got our sign-on information, and we've got some general information about our app. So here we can see our single sign-on URL and things like that. If I go back to sign on, you're going to be able to see view setup instructions here. Nice thing about this guy, if you are and you have access to Okta, this screen right here, by clicking view setup instructions, pretty much gives you just about everything you need to be able to plug into Variphy. I'm going to walk us through two different ways of being able to pull this information out. Not everybody's going to have access to the Okta interface. We understand that. If you do, this is exactly what I would do. I would go back, I would click view setup instructions, and it's going to give me everything I need to plug into Variphy. If you do not, you also have the ability to go ahead and download the metadata. A lot of times, this is what you may receive when you're working with an Okta administrator. They may give you, or you will give them, the service provider ID. Remember, that was the Variphy SP ID we created. Or they may also just give you this identity provider meta file URL. So we're going to save this guy, and we're going to take a look at both of these, so that way we can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. So I'm going to just throw that right into my desktop here, and into my webinars folder, and I'll drop that in my Okta directory here, and we'll overwrite that guy. All right, so we're going to take a look at that guy in 1 second. But first, let's work off the screen that we have in front of us. This is a great resource because it does have just about everything we need. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pop into Variphy. We've basically configured Okta. There's really nothing more we need to do in there. So once you're logged into Variphy, we're going to pop over to the gear on the right-hand side over here, and we're going to go to single sign-on. In mine, you're going to notice that we've got a Google one on here. You're probably not going to have that. So we are going to add a new Saml Connection. We're just basically going to give this guy a general name. That's all this configuration is for. We'll say it Okta Saml. This is just a configuration name. We are going to disable strict. You're going to turn strict off for strict access. The next thing we need is we're going to pull the rest of our information from either our metadata file or directly from that URL that we have here. Notice it's asking for identity provider settings, so I have my identity ID. So if I pop into here, I have my identity provider issuer. That is my identity provider ID. So all I'm going to do is copy that guy, paste him into Variphy, and we're done with that part. Next thing it's asking for is my single sign-on URL. Again, nice thing about this screen is there's my single sign-on URL. Going to give that guy a quick copy, pop back over to Variphy, and paste him in there. And then last but not least, it is asking for our X509 for certificate. And of course, we have our X509 certificate right there. So again, nice thing about this screen is everything's kind of presented to you right in a nice clear box. So I'm going to paste that guy in there, and we are good to go there. So now the next thing that it's asking for is our entity ID. Now remember, I said don't forget that entity ID. That was verify SPID, but that's okay. If we forgot it, if we've got access to Okta, we can go back and get that information. It is going to be back under the general configurations, and there is my audience restriction or my service provider entity ID. But if you wrote that down, like I said in the beginning, like I did, you don't even need to worry about that. You're just going to plug that guy right into there. All right. So now one of the other fields that we were talking about was that name ID format. And right now you can see I'm using a name ID format of unspecified. So if we pop back to our Okta, we can see that our name ID format is email address. And if I edit this guy, you'll see where we set that. And right under name ID format, I chose email address. So that's kind of a little bit of how that's going to go ahead and relate. So we're going to go ahead and change ours to email address, and now we are matching the configuration in Okta. The next thing we're going to go ahead and change, and last but not least, is our attribute for username. And again, that's one of those configurations that we can pull right out of there. We have our name, email account. And if we go ahead and we go back to our general configurations, let's cancel out of here. We'll also be able to see that information directly from the configuration screen. And it is down here, our attribute for statements, our name is email account. Now, this is case sensitive. So keep in mind, whatever you're plugging into that attribute statement is case sensitive. So you're going to want to make sure you're using the same thing here. Now, what this is doing is it's saying that this is the field within your IDP that you're going to be validating the format of your username. In my case, it's email account in my Okta setup. So we're going to use that to say this is the parameter that we're going to be looking up to validate that Victor@verify.com is a valid user. And from my service provider settings, we're going to say, hey, we are also passing the email address. So our format for usernames is going to be an email address. And that's pretty much it. Let's see if this guy works. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to click create. And there we have it. We have a new Okta SAML account. I'm going to click activate. And now that activated. Now, in your case, if you're not logged in, right now I'm logged in as the admin. It may pop up a box that says, would you like to create this user as a SAML bypass account? Essentially what that's saying is, in case this doesn't work, do you want to leave that admin user as just a regular non-SAML user? So you can go ahead and click yes on that. That's not going to be a problem. I would probably say when you're first going through this, go ahead and click yes on that, create that as a bypass account. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go over to your setup tab over here, and you're going to go to user accounts and groups. And now you're going to go ahead and create your SSO user. So remember, we had Victor@verify.com. So I need to tell Verify that there is a Victor@verify.com. And there we go. And you'll notice I have no option for a password here anymore because we are setting up for SSO. So this is now using, because we activated that Okta single sign-on, we are now set up for a single sign-on. If I want this user, and this is where that bypass comes in, to not use single sign-on, well, then I can go ahead and activate this guy, and it is no longer using single sign-on, and it can use a regular username and password. But we're not going to do that. So let's scroll down. I'm going to make Victor an administrator here, and let's test our handiwork. So I'm going to copy our URL out of here, and I'm just going to plug him into an incognito browser over here just to make sure he works. And paste that guy in there. And with any luck, this should bring us to our Okta screen. So now we are authenticating against Okta to make sure that Victor is valid. And it's so far so good. And there we have it. So now what we've done is we've successfully created that Okta application. We've added that application into Verify, make sure all of our configurations are correct, and we've been able to go ahead and successfully log into Verify using that Okta SAML SSO account. So any other accounts that you would need to create would be, again, just at the gear. You do want to make sure that they are added to that Okta application user and valid. That could be done via groups. That could be done by adding individual users, but you do need to add them to Variphy separately to make sure that it's a valid user, because Variphy has its own set of security criteria. So one other thing before we go ahead and let everybody go here is one of the other things that we wanted to take a look at was we don't always get this pretty interface. Again, if I'm not the Okta admin or I'm not logged into Okta, I'm not going to be able to get this interface. But what you will more than likely get a lot of times is a metadata file. And if you remember, we downloaded that metadata file. That's something that you would receive from your Okta administrator. That metadata file is going to contain all this same information. So let's take a quick peek at that guy. So here I'm looking at my metadata file, and it could be ugly, but what I have in here is everything I needed. So here, again, looking at this guy, there's my entity ID. So if you remember, we copied that out of here and we plugged it into Variphy, and let's go ahead and pop back to Variphy, and I'll show you where that information goes and how you could plug it in from just a regular metadata file. All right, so there we have our service provider entity ID. If I look at my metadata file, I have my entity ID. I'm just going to scoot this guy over a little bit. Next thing it was asking for here is our single sign-on service URL. And if you take a look past our 509 certificate here into the very last string, and the format of this file is going to change depending on which file editor you use, I'm going to be able to see my single sign-on URL. And all I have to do is search for single sign-on. If I scroll to the right, I'm going to have that same URL for my single sign-on URL, which I can then paste directly into my single sign-on URL. So again, that's also in your metadata file, and you can easily find that just by searching single sign-on service. All right. You already saw we have our 509 certificate here. So that's our 509. And if I take a look to the little bit to the right over here, you're going to want to make sure you copy that entire certificate. Again, depending on your file editor, that might be in one pretty chunk. Mine's a little bit mixed up. So you can see our X509 certificate. And if I copied all of this information to the end of the 509 certificate, you'll notice that that's the same as what we pulled out of our browser, and I would paste that right into the 509 certificate signing. If you have begin certificate and end certificate, great. But if you do not, no big deal. It's going to work either way. As long as you've got that entire certificate in there with no additional spaces or anything like that, you'll be able to paste him right into the 509 certificate. And last but not least, we also have our attribute name for user accounts. So if I take a look in here, you're also going to notice that I have that name ID. And there we have name ID, and there's the format. So I have my email address, and down there I have email account, and there I had email account. So all that information is still in your metadata file, and that's it. That's how easy it is to go ahead and set up an Okta SSO connection within Variphy. And Matt, I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball back to you. Do we have any questions today?
Yeah, we do have a couple. Awesome. Thank you, Victor. Fantastic job as always. You make it look so easy. All right, let me go ahead and reshare my screen so we can get into the Q&A. Share screen 2. Okay, here we are. All right, so the couple questions that I do have. This one is from Denise. Does Variphy support other SAML SSO ID providers? And actually, yes, we do. We support the major identity providers. Would be Azure, ADFS, as well as Google Sign-On, and Okta, as Victor just demonstrated here today. The Azure demonstration we actually have slated for a webinar for April 21st. So please feel free to go ahead and join and register for that upcoming webinar. But great question, Denise. And then we have a secondary question from Mary. Do we need to generate and load certs prior to SAML SSO? Okay, that's a great question. Some you do, most you don't. I do know that Active Directory federated services, so ADFS, does require preloaded CA certs loaded, but Okta and Azure do not, and I'm pretty sure Google doesn't either. Victor, does it?
Google does not. I'm pretty sure Google does not require those certs either. So yeah, the main one is the Active Directory federated services one.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. And then the last question is from Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. And actually, Victor, you just answered this. The 509 cert, does it need to have the beginning and ending piece labels within that cert? And you just answered that. No, it does not. Nice to have, question. But not necessary.
Yeah, not for Okta. If we needed to enter those 509 certificates into the service provider settings, which in Okta's case, we do not. Then you would need those begin and end. But with the Okta setup, we don't have to enter that 509 certificate into the service provider settings. So you're good without the beginning and end.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, I believe that wraps up Q&A. If there are any other questions that we haven't had a chance to get to, please feel free to go ahead and shoot them over to us and we can address them offline and get back to you immediately. All right, so I suppose the moment everyone's been waiting for, the Amazon $50 gift card. And this week's webinar weekly winner is, drumroll, is Robert Moore. Woo! Congratulations, Robert. We will have your account manager get in contact with you very shortly and go ahead and provide you that $50 Amazon card. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. Do just want to make a reference to next week's webinar. Victor and I are back at it again, and next week our webinar is on advanced call type utilization with a focus on newer secondary groupings for accounting call types, which we will cover. So please feel free to go ahead and register for that. As well as I do want to make mention of, excuse me for a moment, we do have all that, all the information Victor ran through today. We certainly have that in a knowledge base article in Variphy, as well as this webinar will be posted into our webinar section soon. But definitely, as always, I like to plug the webinar suggestion page. If we have not covered any webinars to your liking, or if there's something special that you'd like to see worked on in a webinar, in a demonstration, please visit the variphy.com webinars section and go ahead and log some suggestions for us. Other than that, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon and be good to one another. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care all. Bye.